Are you ready?
Activate.
Sequence start 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Shadows in the Dark. I am your host, Jeremiah Greer, and I want to apologize about this past Thursday show, as we did have to cancel it. I was a little bit under the weather, and quite honestly, not really in the I guess just not able to host the show at all. We really have got to work on getting that guest host set up, so that won't happen again. But I definitely want to say I appreciate those who sent some emails to me wishing me to get better. I really, really appreciate that. And again, I do apologize for having to cancel that show. We are going to reschedule, so Olav will be on at a later date to talk about the same subject. So that will be happening soon. We haven't set the date yet, but we are going to be doing that within the next couple of days. So you'll be able to see what is going, when that is going to happen. But again, I do apologize. But I tell you what, we have a great show tonight because we are back on the air live, and I'm glad to be back. We're going to be talking about mysteries, treasure, odd people, a little bit of everything with our guest tonight, Lionel Thorpe. So we'll be welcoming him on the show here in about 10-15 minutes or so it's going to be a lot of fun. This should be an interesting show. He seems to write and talk about everything, so I'm really kind of excited about this show. It's going to be one of those ones where we can just go all over the place. So, and I definitely want to say thanks to all those joining us in the chat room. We really appreciate that. If you're out there listening live and you're not in the chat room, well, you're more than welcome to join us. Just go to shadowsinthedarkradio.com. Click on the link that says listen, and you will be automatically dropped right in the chat room, as well as the show streaming live. Well, let's get to some news stories. Let's see what's going on around the world. Some interesting stuff, a little bit of bizarre, a little bit of archaeological finds, a little bit of this and that. Well, villagers in a poor community in central Cambodia live hand to mouth, but many dug into their pockets to help pay for the funeral of a 3-day-old calf with a dark reptilian hide that many believed was holy. The female calf was born Tuesday and died this past Thursday. Villagers believed in the animal's divinity because there had been a drought in the area for 3 months, but it rained the day after it was born. Cambodians have for centuries worshipped a cow god believed to bring peace and prosperity. The deity disappeared from the land long ago, but the calf may have been a sign it was returning to help them. Hundreds of villagers flocked to see the animal, lighting incense to pray for its well-being and collecting its saliva, believed to cure illness. The flood of visitors panicked the cow's mother, affecting her ability to produce enough milk to feed the calf, which eventually led to its death. But the faithful were undeterred. The calf's corpse was placed on a plastic sheet, and people washed water over it in the hopes of making the liquid holy. The animal was buried in a rice field near where it was born on Friday. Well, Mexico City's thousands of stores went green Wednesday as amended ordinances on solid waste. I am all tongue-tied. I just look at that. You take one day off, and what happens? Well, on solid waste now outlaws businesses from giving out thin plastic bags that are not biodegradable. The law affects all stores, production facilities, and service providers within the federal district, which encompasses the city limits. Nearly 9 million people live inside the district, and another 10 million reside in surrounding communities that make up Greater Mexico City. Mexico City becomes the second large metropolitan area in the Western Hemisphere to outlaw the bags. San Francisco in March 2007 enacted an ordinance that gave supermarkets 6 months and large chain pharmacies about a year to phase out the bags. Los Angeles is set to impose a ban if the state of California does not enact a statewide 25-cent per bag fee by July. About 90% of the bags are used in the United States are not recycled. Bans and other restrictions on plastic bags are in place in several countries. The world's population is forecast to hit 7 billion people in 2011. The vast majority of its growth coming in developing and in many cases the poorest nations, according to a report released on Wednesday. A staggering 97% of global growth over the next 40 years will happen in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, according to the Population Reference Bureau's 2009 World Population Data Sheet. In the developed world, the United States and Canada will account for most of the growth, half from immigration and half from natural increase in the population. High fertility rates and young population base in the developing world will fuel most of the growth, especially in Africa, where women often give birth to 6 or 7 children over a lifetime. The number is about 2 in the United States and 1.5 in Canada. A stark contrast can be drawn between Uganda and Canada, which currently has about 34 million and 31 million residents, respectively. By 2050, Canada's population is projected to be at 42 million, while Uganda's is expected to soar to 96 million, more than tripling. By 2005, India is projected to be the world's most populous nation at 1.7 billion, overtaking current leader China, with its forecast to hit 1.4 billion. The United States is expected to reach 439 million for the number 3 spot on the list. Well, Portuguese archaeologists made an important discovery this week when they unearthed what is believed to have been the headquarters of Luso-British troop commander General Wellington. Located between Mafra and Torres Vedras, the fort is thought to have sheltered General Wellington's troops serving the Torres Vedras line during the French invasions between 1807 and 1814. The general's private quarters, a storeroom, a warehouse, and a weapons locker were to find during the excavation. The division had been previously outlined in maps, but this is the first time excavations were attempted to unearth them. The good state of conservation that the storeroom was found in has allowed the archaeologists to study construction techniques and materials that were used for construction at the time. Well, listen to this story. I thought this was just amazing. A giant plant that can eat bugs and even rodents have been discovered in Southeast Asia. The carnivorous plant was found by researchers atop Mount Victoria, a remote mountain in Palawan, Philippines. The research team, led by Stuart McPherson of Red Fern National History Productions, had learned of the plant in 2000 after a group of Christian missionaries stumbled upon it while trekking up the remote mountain and reported it to a local newspaper. The pitcher plant is the world's second largest and can grow to more than 4 feet tall, with a picture-shaped structure filled with liquid. The plant secretes nectar around its mouth that lures rats, insects, and other prey into its trap. Once an animal has fallen in, enzymes and acids in the fluid break down the carcass of the drowned victim. The world's largest pitcher plant was discovered in 1858 by a British naturalist Hugh Lowe in Borneo. The plant's rat-eating habit was confirmed 4 years later when his colleague Spencer St. John found a drowned rat inside of one of the specimens. Though some have approached McPherson to ask about the likelihood of cultivating the monster plants as mousetraps for rodent-infested regions like New York City, the botanist, who also happens to specialize in pitcher plants, says he finds the idea a bit far-fetched. Can you imagine that? A 4 feet tall pitcher plant that eats rats. Just amazing. It is amazing what is around our world, and that is what is our guest is going to be talking about tonight. That is Lionel Fanthorpe. We're going to be talking about treasure. We're going to be talking about mysteries on people. Like I said, just a little bit of everything. It should be a very, very interesting show, so don't go anywhere. We're going to return with our guest, Lionel Fanthorpe.
Visit www.shadowsinthedarkradio.com today to sign up for our free newsletter, join as a member of our forum, or browse our online store where you can find books, CDs, and DVDs, like a signed copy of The President's Vampire by Robert Damon Schneck, or the complete works of Dr. Gary Frick for only $20. That's 4 books signed by Dr. Frick that carry a great message. You will also find downloadable products like Mysteries Magazine and the Donald Kehoe interviews, DVDs featuring Charlie Carlson and Mr. Lobo. So go to www.shadowsinthedarkradio.com today and be a part of the show.
With 50 years in print, Lionel Thorpe has written over 250 books, as well as numerous columns, articles, and features. He is now a popular TV and radio presenter and celebrity guest on chat shows. Lionel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, now, and of course, we're sitting there talking before we go live, and one thing I forgot to ask you was the pronunciation of your last name. I hope I got that correct.
It was absolutely perfect.
All right. Well, wonderful. Well, Lionel, it is a pleasure to have you on the show, and again, for staying up late to join us. And it's going to be an exciting show. I think we're going to be able to talk about a lot of things. So to kind of help us get started, tell us a little bit about you and how you got interested in, my goodness, a little time, the Templars, mysteries, treasures. It goes on and on.
Well, it started when I was a boy in school, and I wasn't the best student, and I used to try hard to avoid anything that was going to be difficult and was likely to cause a headache. So if there was something like Latin grammar or the advanced stages of mathematics, then I would sneak away. It was a very old building. It was an old 17th century, 18th century building in which the school was situated, and the library was one of those big, old-fashioned libraries that had the kind of freestanding shelves in rows, so that if the master on duty in the library was busy marking, which they nearly always were, and you could come in very quietly and get behind one of the shelves, you could dodge what you were trying to get away from in the classroom. And on those shelves, while you were hiding away from the maths or the Latin, there would be a number of books that looked interesting. And it was there that I started reading Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, Hugo Gernsback, all of the Edgar Allan Poe, the mystery, the exciting stuff, the horror, and the fantasy. And I got such a taste for this kind of fiction that as I got a little older and became a young adult, I thought, well, I wonder, those books that I used to enjoy so much, I wonder if it's anything like that for real in the world outside. And I then moved from what for me had been interesting and exciting fiction into somebody, a neighbor maybe, said they'd seen a ghost, or someone else said that they'd been to a haunted castle and they'd either heard things or seen things. And it just followed on for what seemed to me a natural progression from reading about them in stories to actually investigating the real thing. And fortunately, when I met and Patricia and I married in 1957, she shared my interest in researching strange phenomena, the anomalous, the unexplained. And we went all over the world together looking for strange things that we could investigate at first hand and then write about them. And part of my earlier career, I was lecturing for the extramural board at Cambridge University, and I did a course for them called The Psychology and Sociology of Unexplained Phenomena. And that meant that we had to find the data. We were looking for the facts. We had a kind of a scientific approach to it, and took us around the world. We did the writing and the broadcasting after we'd investigated first and tried to be objective and scientific.
Wow, that is interesting. And, I have to say, we're commenting about it in the chat room, you have such a deep, soothing voice, and I guess that is why you do radio.
Well, I get it almost embarrasses me, and in the nicest kind of way, that I get the loveliest requests from listeners to come in, and they say very similar things. They enjoy my voice, and they love listening to me on radio, and then I have the pleasure of meeting up with hosts like yourself or George Noory or other pals who are, established radio figures and have important shows. And I get the same thing from my friends. My hosts become my friends, and I just love broadcasting. And thank you for those very kind words about the voice.
You're more than welcome. I mean, it is a great voice. I have to say, it is very soothing, and in broadcasting, it is very. I enjoy it myself. And now, what exactly, do you have a particular show that you do, or are you just kind of here and there with broadcasting?
I tend to be here and there at the moment. I'm hoping to start a new series with a company called Edge. They're a TV show here in the UK, and they want me to do something for them on the lines that I did a few years back for the Channel 4 shows that I used to make for, it was called 4TN TV, named after the great Charles Thorpe, the great American investigator. And then what we do was to, what we did in those days on 4TN TV, on Channel 4, was to find a mystery, and then we'd go and investigate it. We'd interview witnesses who had seen or heard something strange, or we'd go over to the place itself and take the camera with us and hope that something would happen. And then I used to write a song for each of the shows that went with the mystery. And that turned out to be one of the most popular things that was in it. We did, for instance, if we were doing the Sasquatch, and up over here in the Rockies, America and Canada, there was I can give you just one little verse of that if you think our listeners could put up with it.
Yeah, sure. Love to hear it.
Okay, Jeremiah. Well, it starts off, as we tried to bring a bit of humor in, you see. It went something like this. We were climbing in the Rockies in a pine-ringed mossy patch, and there upon a boulder sat a 7-foot Sasquatch. And it goes on to say that instead of us catching him, he caught us, and he put us in 2 big sacks, put us on his shoulder, and disappeared up into the mountains, and went back to his family with us as toys. And the verse there went, he'd a wife and 7 children, a little Sasquatch girls and boys, and I can state there's no worse fate than to live as Sasquatch toys. And we finished it up by saying he'd a tiny concentration span, and the interest did not last. So they threw us out last Friday when the garbage truck came past, and so on and so on. But that's definitely. We got a CD album out with some of the songs on as well.
That is great, and it's funny kind of talking about that, because we not recently, it was about a year ago, or so. We did a kids show, a kids take on the paranormal was one of our shows, and me and my children wrote what we called the paranormal song, which took it took the paranormal icons and and kind of put a humorous twist on it. And, like we had the Bigfoot was in the bathtub and his hair was clogging up the drain. He had used all the shampoo up and things.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, I love that. That's terrific. And, you see, I think if we look for a moment into the psychology and sociology of the mysteries to see why we behave as we do when we're confronted by the mysterious and the anomalous, laughter. I can always remember an old psychology lecturer we had at college, he was a very impressive guy, and he said that laughter should be thought of as a release mechanism. And he went on to say that there was the ah, then the aha, and finally the ha-ha response to pressure and tension in the human mind. And the long drawn-out ah is when you see something really beautiful, a lovely sunset or a summer sky full of wonderful stars. And then he said, the second of these is when you've been able to solve clue number 7 across on a particularly difficult crossword, and you snap your fingers and you go, ha-ha, that's the answer. Rather like the great old Greek scientist who, came out of the bath having discovered how to find the volume of an irregular solid and shouts, Eureka, I have it. And the final one is the laughter. And he said there's so many of the jokes that get to us most powerfully tend to deal with subjects that we find either difficult or frightening, such as the paranormal, and the strange little 2-liner, 3-liner where the guy is in the haunted house and the hideous monster appears at the foot of the bed and reaches towards him and says in medieval English, "There's only me and thee." And the guy reaches for his trousers and says, "As soon as I get my pants on, buddy, there'll only be thee." And it is the laughter, the relief, the release of the tension and pressure. You would imagine this poor guy alone in the haunted castle and struggling desperately to find some clothes so that he can get out of the haunted room.
Right.
And so it's laughter then as a release mechanism. And I thought the words of your song were terrific about the guy blocking up the drain and using all the shampoo. Great stuff.
It was, and I'll have to send you, email that to you sometime. It's about an 8-minute long song, and it goes, we have a ghost, we have Bigfoot, I think we have a dragon in it,
right,
an alien, and it was fun because even the kids wrote most of the lyrics,
yep.
And we just had a blast playing that over the show. We actually played it live over the show. I pulled out the guitar. We had a lot of fun with it, and it is talking about sometimes you have to have a little bit of a humorous look at things.
You do, yeah,
mm-hmm.
You do. Just occurred to me, Roger, if next time we email, if you'd put me a postal address in there, I'll send you the album. You'd be very, very welcome. If you want to play any of them, go ahead. There's some stuff. It sounds as if we share a similar sense of humor, which is terrific.
It does. I would definitely love to hear it. Now, some of the other things, treasure. Now you've got a couple books. From what we said in the bio that you have 250 books. Now on your website you have 17 listed, and it seems that you get into Templar treasure as well as I know you got undiscovered treasure, and I guess also treasures of the sea. Do you get into that as well?
Oh yes, we do. There are all kinds of treasures. I think one of the things that we do in the latest of the treasure books, the one that's out this spring, is to look at the different formats that treasure can take, whether it can be something that has a very deep religious significance, so that in itself, intrinsically, the thing would have no value because of what it's made from, or have no general value, but to a particular religious group, if this was a lock of hair from one of their great leaders, or was perhaps a shoe or a fraction of a fragment of a garment that some great religious leader had worn, and it has this for them, this great holy value. It's unique because of what it is and because of its associations. Then you have the treasure, which is in the form of knowledge, and that again is invisible and it's abstract. But if we can think of some of the ancients, well, let's come up with a for instance on that one. The indigenous people of Nova Scotia, who are still a lovely nation, are the Micmac, and they were there long before settlers from Europe came across to Nova Scotia. And in part of their oral tradition, they had a hero named Glooskap, and he, in their tradition, came over the Great Sea in a canoe as big as an island with trees. Now that sounds to me like a medieval galleon with masts and sails.
Right.
Canoe as big as an island with trees. And he taught them how to catch fish. Now, when the archaeologists arrived and began going through the ancient remains that the Micmac people had left over the centuries, they discovered, because with modern scientific analytical equipment, you can go over waste material of an ancient people and find that there was at some point in their history a significant change of diet. And the archaeologists who were examining the detritus material found that there had come a point when the diet had changed significantly and had included a great deal more fish. Now, tie this lot back in with the Templars being attacked and largely destroyed by a very unpleasant and greedy king called Philip le Bel in 1307. But the Templar fleet was safe at La Rochelle in France, and according to traditions, that Templar fleet escaped, followed the old Viking route round by Iceland and Greenland, came down the Atlantic coast of Canada, and settled in Nova Scotia. They had been befriended before they left Europe by some northern Scottish nobles, a man called the Sinclair family, and they in turn had enabled the Templar fleet to get across to the Canadian coast. Now, if we put those two different stories and traditions together, the Hebrideans had been great fishermen, an island race on an archipelago of islands. So when they came across to Canada with their new Templar friends from La Rochelle, who were escaping from Philip of France, they showed their friendly new hosts, who had previously been fishing with spears, how to fish with nets. And so when you or I, had we been Micmac fishermen looking after our families 700 years ago, had we suddenly learnt that if two of us together took a net and trawled the coastline, we could catch 100 fish, enough for the entire village to eat well, whereas previously, up to our ankles in water and looking hard for fish with a spear, if we got 3 in a day, we'd have been considered good huntsmen.
Right, yeah.
So, by taking the old Templar tradition, the old Hebridean tradition from Scotland, and the idea that perhaps an early European expedition had crossed the Atlantic with a totally different purpose. They were trying to get away from Philip and to take some treasure with them to hide, and had met the friendly and hospitable and very cultured Micmac people who had made them welcome, and with whom they'd exchanged knowledge and cultural technique for fishing with a net, and had changed the diet of their hosts. So you've got a Templar legend about the fleet leaving La Rochelle with a great treasure, and then on Oak Island, just off the coast of Nova Scotia, which was another of our books, there was the Oak Island Money Pit. And maybe that was the work of these Templar refugees 600 or 700 years ago.
Now, where does the Oak Island money pit is? I mean, that's one of the biggest things out there when it comes to treasure, and I can't say I am up to date on it. Where does that stand? I know some people won't even mess with it anymore.
Well, it's a very, very interesting story. It goes all the way back. We've been over there many times, and we've had the privilege of becoming friends with Dan Blankenship. And now Dan was an American war hero who later became a contractor, and who then became so fascinated by the Rennes-le-Chateau mystery that he gave up a very lucrative contracting business that he was running successfully, and went over to Oak Island, where, to the best of our knowledge, he's still working. He's well into his 80s now, but one of Dan's great war exploits, and this is World War II, he was driving an ammunition wagon across a bridge to an Allied detachment who were holding off a German attack but were running short of ammunition. And Dan, when you can persuade him to tell the story himself, and he's a very modest hero, as most of the real heroes are, he said, I was leaning at 90 degrees out of my Jeep, steering with my left hand and keeping away from the machine gun bullets as best I could, and the screen shattered. And he said, I just got across the bridge, rolled clear, and he said, you should have seen those gunners unpacking the ammunition, and you should have heard the German attackers retreating. And it was a tremendous episode for which he was duly recognized and rewarded. But this is the kind of guy who is exploring Oak Island and has been for years. And one of his exploits was to dig a shaft, because in Dan's theory there was much more to it than the single money pit. It goes all the way down. A shaft that he dug was called Shaft 101. And his theory was, if you could get down deep enough and then go across, you could beat the problem of the flood water. But for any of our listeners who are not familiar with the basic story, maybe if I start at the beginning just very briefly. In 1795, three teenage boys, Smith, Vaughan, and McGinnis, went across to the island. They had a day off from their very hard work as it was in Nova Scotia in the 18th century, and they went across to the island. They found a clearing in the oak trees, which gave the island its name, and it was clear to them that somebody had dug a shaft and the earth of the backfill had slowly settled. And of course, in 1795, if three teenage boys saw something like that, their first thought would be pirate treasure. And Mahone Bay itself, which is off the coast of Chester in Nova Scotia, just a little bit south of Halifax, it was named after the Mahone, which was a type of vessel that pirates loved to sail in. So they were even more convinced that they had come across the top of a pirate's treasure cache, and they started to dig. They went home and got their equipment and started to dig, and they got down about 10 feet, which was a pretty good achievement for three teenage lads, and found that there were oak logs wedged across the shaft. They'd also noticed that the sides of the shaft were brick-hard clay, whereas what they were taking out was loose backfill. And the clay on the sides of the shaft still bore the marks of the picks and the spades of whoever had dug it at some time well before 1795. The other thing that the boys discovered was when they first found the top of the shaft, one big oak tree standing beside it had had a branch lopped off short, and from the end of that branch hung an old ship's block and tackle. And that, of course, gave them the idea that something very heavy had been lowered via the block and tackle down into the depths of the pit. They got down another 10 feet, hit another platform of oak logs, which they managed to extricate, and then found there was just more backfill going down to heaven knows where. So an adult expedition finally got organized, came to the island, and the adult expedition got down to the 100-foot level with a platform of oak logs wedged horizontally into the shaft approximately every 10 feet. Then they got beaten by the floodwater, because whoever had designed that shaft either to conceal treasure or to protect a grave of some very important person, whoever had dug that shaft had also dug 2 flood tunnels that went to the Atlantic end of the island, which was known as Smith's Cove. And those 2 flood tunnels were so designed that if somebody who did not know the secret of their existence went through not only the layers of oak which the original builders had put there, but through layers of clay, and the kind of clay that they would use to cork the boats to keep them watertight. And once you'd broken that airlock, then the floodwater could come in. And Patricia and I have stood on that artificial beach on Oak Island that the original diggers of that tunnel had made, a couple of 100 feet of this, and the beach had been put there and had been so lined with the powerful marine grasses and boulders that it wouldn't silt up. It was a kind of filter that kept the sand from getting through and blocking the flood tunnels. Now, Oak Island is one of the 7 wonders of the world, and I said, to the best of our knowledge, it was a year or 2 since we were there, but they've got their own website, and Dan is still very much involved, and just as he once fought his country's enemies with great heroism, so now in his 80s he's fighting old age and he's winning.
Now, do you think that they'll ever get into that shaft and find out what exactly is in there?
Well, I would love to think so. I'm very much a yes we can man, when it comes to can we do it. And it'll be incredibly difficult because we're up against the ingenuity of whoever dug that protected grave. And the Templars again come to mind as the possible originators of that, because when we think about the castles that they had a hand in building and their designs for some of the great cathedrals of Europe, which also bear their handiwork, and the amazing chapel up at Roslin near Edinburgh, which again is absolutely rich in Templar design and Templar ideas. They were great architects as well as being very great warriors. And if they had wanted to protect something, they protected it. And one of the other theories, we had a great friend, sadly passed over now, but when he was there in Nova Scotia, he was a surveyor professionally, and he'd formerly been a member of the Canadian Navy, and so he had all kinds of knowledge as a naval officer about the sea and the tides and the currents, all the kind of things that a professional naval officer needs to know. And then he'd combined that with his knowledge of surveying, so that here was a man who really knew the territory, both from the point of view of what the Atlantic was doing and what the local geology was like. And George was of the opinion that the shaft had been dug to protect a very special grave. And one of the things that led him to this idea was that over the years, since 1795, as one expedition after another got down there and explored and tried to get further, they had used a lot of drilling, and they brought up core samples from below the water that was otherwise defeating them. And the drill brought up a fragment of parchment, brought up a few links of gold chain, but it was the passage of the drill, what it had actually gone through. Down at the 100-foot level, just below that, it had gone through some spruce that looked like the top of what we might call a treasure chamber, or maybe it was a burial chamber. Then it had dropped a little way. Then it had gone through 2 boxes, 2 layers of oak, which were full of loose objects that defied all the drillers' efforts to catch any of them and bring them up on the pod auger that they were using to explore this chamber. Then it went through some more oak, then another 18 inches or so of what this loose material was that wouldn't come up, then some more oak, about 18 inches below, and then down through some more spruce and into the earth again. So the drill was saying, there's a chamber here with a lid made of spruce, a ceiling made of spruce. Within it are 2 boxes full of a peculiar loose material that we can't get up. The one under the... And now, George used to say that his theory was that they were 2 coffins, and that the links of gold chain were part of a ceremonial dress or a uniform that had been used when that hero was buried. So there we are, all very mysterious.
Yeah. Now, with the construction of the shaft, has anything ever been seen that is very similar to it, that ever been found? Or is this a very unique, I guess, grave or treasure shaft or something?
Well, it's unique in my experience. There have been other theories put forward by some other hard-working researchers that in the so-called pirate heartlands, the places where they used to love to go, and where there was, shall we say, where the forces of law and order in the 18th century were not particularly powerful and couldn't really suppress them. And on some of the famous pirate islands, especially like Tortuga, there were similar shafts, and one of the interesting theories was that the shaft was something of a decoy, that it was a kind of pirate bank account or a pirate shared treasure vault, that you went down, but that was the red herring, that was the decoy in case anybody found you, and you then went up again. And some of these old pirates were well educated and highly intelligent, and they were good navigators, and they could do the mathematics required to be a good navigator, and they then went up again. So if you could imagine a thing like an umbrella pushed into the earth, and then the spokes of that umbrella pointing back towards the surface. Now, if you dug straight down as the umbrella shaft, and then up at a deliberate angle which you'd calculated very carefully with your navigational instruments, then at the top of your umbrella spoke shaft, maybe only 6 feet below the surface, if only you knew where exactly it was, you would have a little alcove, and in the alcove you would put your treasure. So when someone came along, not knowing what had been done, they would think, oh, the treasure must be at the bottom of this shaft. So the big shaft itself was booby-trapped at the bottom, like the flood water in Nova Scotia, because nobody wanted to go down to that depth, and that wasn't the secret. What you had to know was, oh yes, if I take 10 paces north-northeast of the main shaft, dig down to a depth of 7 feet, I will find where I've left my treasure boxes in my part of the pirate bank. Now, I think that's ingenious, but I've never seen one for myself, although researchers whose writings I respect and who would be giving clear factual accounts, they maintain that such umbrella-shaped shafts were quite ingenious, and that they actually existed.
Oh, that is something else. That'd be very interesting to see. For sure. Now, I do have a question from the chat room from the Professor Slim King, asking, about treasures in the U.S. Obviously, I'm in the United States. Have you researched any treasures here that have considered lost treasure?
Oh, yes, there are all sorts of absolutely fascinating things in the USA. In the way that I'm going to just, I've got that in front of me, and bear with me just a couple of minutes, and I'll find that one. I've got a section here in the book, which I'll be delighted just to read a quick extract from, which is called Transatlantic Treasure. There's a whole section, first of all, about the European treasures and Asian treasures, and then I've got a section here. One of them, it begins with one of the most valuable undiscovered treasures in the Americas, is the one associated with the tragic Habsburg Emperor Maximilian I of Mexico, 1832-1867. And Maximilian had been born in Vienna as the son of Archduke Franz Karl of Austria and Princess Sophie, and there were persistent rumors that his real father was Napoleon II, who was the son of the redoubtable Napoleon I. Mm-hmm. Now, Maximilian's tragedy started when the very devious and unreliable Emperor Napoleon III of France persuaded him to accept an invitation from a number of Mexican royalists who wanted him to become their emperor. Now, Napoleon's main motive was that having Maximilian in power in Mexico would ensure that a debt of $15 million, which was owing to France, would be duly paid. And then the European help was withdrawn, and without that European help, Maximilian was hopelessly outnumbered by his opponents in Mexico. He fled to Querétaro with a handful of supporters who were still loyal, and the plan was apparently to ship out his treasure, American, Spanish, and Austrian gold and silver, and he was heading, or his expedition was heading for Galveston in Texas. And the plan was to ship it out to Austria into the safekeeping of Maximilian's wife, Carlotta, he'd sent her home to safety first. But we're back in 1867, and Texas was a particularly tough and wild and dangerous place in those days. It was no place to take treasure unless you got a small army to guard it.
Right.
And he only had about 20 loyal Maximilianos, one of whom was a girl who was the daughter of their leader, and they headed for San Antonio first on the way to Galveston. They crossed the Texas border not far from Presidio, and there they met a group of ex-Confederate soldiers who promptly disposed of them somewhere near Castle Gap and Horsehead Crossing on the Pecos River. And there was too much treasure for these ex-Confederate soldiers to carry with them, so they buried it near the place where they'd done battle with Maximilian's men, whom they'd wiped out. The plan was to return later and pick up the treasure. Now, the leader of those ex-Confederate fighting men was a guy called Bill Murdoch, and he apparently became ill as they traveled east, so they left him behind and pressed on to Fort Concho, where they ran into an Apache war party who did to them what they had done to Maximilian's men. And it was Murdoch who, although dying at Denton in Texas, told the doctor who attended him, he used his last hours, he told that doctor, Dr. Black, about Maximilian's buried treasure. Black and a friend named O'Connor, who was a lawyer, went back, searched everywhere around Castle Gap, and have found nothing. So somewhere, lying there since the 1860s, have been wagon loads of treasure, And I guess that some of it is still there. So there's one that's well worth looking for in the USA.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it might be. And that's something that I've put a little bit of thought to is how much lost treasure is around the globe. I mean, it would just amaze us.
Oh, it certainly would. There's far more down there than I think has been recovered. If we just go back to the basically picking up on your very interesting and important point there, that the motives, if we dive back into the motives for hiding treasure and how much is still down there, normally places which have been sort of centers of activity, the nations that found themselves between two great powers and have become theaters of war, people have run for their lives, and you either take it with you, bury it somewhere safe, or you bury it in the hope that the army which is just coming in and is overrunning your settlement won't find it, and then you also hope that when the political and military situation improves, then you can go back and get it. And in so many cases, as we were talking about with that case in Texas, where Maximilian's gold, first of all, it's taken by a group of ex-Confederates, then those men themselves are wiped out by an Apache raiding party. So you have it taken from the original owners, then the guys who took it buried it because there was too much to take with them, then they themselves get wiped out, and then the unsuccessful search efforts by Dr. Black and his friend O'Connor, and so it's because of the wild and dangerous, unsettled times that whoever had the knowledge of where it was is no longer there to tell the rest of us.
Right. Well, and that's a good point, talking about where they wiped out Maximilian's crew, and then they themselves, even in some cases, I guess, the complete story is lost, that there's no record of it because whoever held the secret never recorded it and has thus passed away.
And it's gone. Yes, it's just gone with them. There's a much more recent story. There's an unsolved, unfinished treasure hunting mystery reported from a cemetery in Montevideo in Uruguay on the Atlantic coast of South America. And one perspective of the story begins with a heroic naval officer, Commander Valdez, who went down with his ship during World War II. Now, he had a priest friend, Father Pedro de Catala, who lived until 1945, but he had told Valdez that there was a secret treasure hidden in a secret chamber accessed by a deep tunnel below the Montevideo cemetery. And that was all that Father Pedro had said. But, almost as though he had a premonition, Commander Valdez told his wife everything the priest had said before setting out on board ship for what was to be his last voyage. And somewhere, if we are to believe what Father Pedro said, somewhere underneath one of the cemeteries in Montevideo is an enormous concealed treasure. And apparently it came originally from Italy and was connected with the Massilotti family and with the great Garibaldi. So that somewhere, if only we could find out where to start digging, and of course it's the most difficult place on earth to get permission to dig, is a cemetery, there could be something of enormous wealth waiting to be uncovered.
Wow. Yeah, and getting under a cemetery, that would be a tough one for sure. Not many people will let that happen. I tell you what, Lionel, before we get into anything else, we only got a few minutes before we go to the break, so I think we're going to cue it up just a bit early.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so that way we don't get in the middle of something and have to, keep going and going. So for all those tuning in, stay tuned. We're going to continue talking about treasures and other mysteries with our guest tonight, Lionel Fanthorpe. You are listening to Shadows in the Dark, broadcasting live at shadowsinthedarkradio.com and Dark Plains Radio at darkplainsradio.com. The show can also be heard as a rebroadcast at ParaX at para-x.com and available as a podcast at Black Vault Radio at blackvaultradio.com and Planet Paranormal at planetparanormal.com.
Have you been wondering what gift to get that special person in your life? Then you need to visit Mountain View Candle Works, your one-stop headquarters for candles, fountains, specialty foods, and much more. Just visit www.mountainviewcandleworks.com. We make your candles with mountain care.
More than just another New Age journal, Mysteries Magazine provides a thought-provoking, in-depth look into myths, magic, and the paranormal, as well as the mysteries which have intrigued both historians and scientists from the beginning of time. So subscribe today by visiting www.mysteriesmagazine.com or pick up a copy at select newsstands throughout the U.S. and Canada. Again, that was www.mysteriesmagazine.com. Challenge your beliefs.
Are you wondering if the path that you've chosen is the right one for you? Or would you like to see a glimpse of what the future may hold? Tarot may be able to help you understand better the path that you're on. The cards don't lie, nor do they lead you astray, as they're a vehicle for messages from God, angels, and guides. Have your cards read for you by world-renowned tarot card master Scotty Roberts. To schedule a private reading with Scotty, visit www.tarotbyscotty.com today and find out what the cards may hold for you.
Hello everybody, this is Mr. G from the World Paranormal Society and from Haunt the Hunters on DarkPlainsRadio.com. I would like to tell you about a website. It's called TreasureForAllUSA.com, where I got everything from knickknacks to complete DVR systems. A place where you can shop for everything and everything, and if we don't have it, I'll find it for you. That's again, TreasureForAllUSA.com, everything from DVR systems, TV sets, knickknacks, and gifts for loved ones. Come check it out, TreasureForAllUSA.com. You won't be disappointed.
Well, tonight we're talking with Lionel Fanthorpe, and if you're just tuning in, we've been discussing a lot about treasure, lost treasures. We've talked about Oak Island, the Maximilian, the Templars, very, very interesting stuff. And Lionel, I realized something before we went to the break there. I forgot to ask you to do, and if that would be to give your website out.
Yeah, I would love to, Jeremiah. The website is World Wide Web, the 3 W's, and then my name with a hyphen in the middle. So it's all lowercase, Lionel, little dash, Fanthorpe. It's not an underscore, it's the hyphen in the middle. And then just .com, so it's World Wide Web, Lionel-Fanthorpe.com. And all of our listeners will be ever so welcome on the website, and it's quite a big one, so make sure you've got 5 minutes to spare before you pull into it. And it's also got all my contact details on there with my email and our address and phone numbers, so that any friends who want to get in touch, and very often I find when I've had the privilege of doing a broadcast in the USA that I meet all kinds of interesting new friends, and they stay in contact with us, and it's always wonderful to make friends that way. And I always do my best to answer. There's nearly always 100 emails waiting for me every morning, but I do my best to get round to them. So if you could, those of you who email me, if you're prepared to have a little patience while I fight my way through 100 or so, I will get to you, I promise. I never leave anybody unanswered.
All right, and of course, if anybody has a problem finding your website that's tuning in or listening to the archive of the show, we do have it linked right off of shadowsinthedarkradio.com, as well as 17 of your books, it looks like. Yeah,
there should also be a big list of my religious books, I said, because as well as working as broadcaster and author and teacher, and I teach from postgraduate university downwards, as well as all of those things, I am an Anglican priest. And so when somebody needs, for instance, one of my next jobs after we finish the broadcast on what will be Monday here in the UK, I shall be sadly conducting a funeral for friends who've asked for me to do that for them. It's one of the things that goes with the territory when you're a priest. And I regard trying to help a bereaved family as maybe the most important thing a priest can do, that you share with the people who've lost a loved one your own belief that there's a wonderful world to come and that we do meet again. And maybe that's one of the stories I could share. I had an amazing experience there, Jeremiah, that I'd love to share with our listeners. Well, I had a very great pal called Billy Farrer, and Billy and I used to teach together in Cambridgeshire. And after I left that college where we worked together and came over here to Wales, Billy retired, and I got a phone call from him to say that he'd been diagnosed as terminal, and could I go and see him? And of course I did. You know, when a guy's been a lifelong friend, you do everything you can to spend the last few weeks that he's got with him. And then after this time when I tried to share as much of what was left of his life as I could, I got a phone call from the village priest, Father Ian, in the little village where Bill had retired, to say, Lionel, I'm awful sorry, but Billy has just passed over. Can you come and we'll share his funeral together? So I drove over to Cambridge. I spent the night, the plan was to spend the night in the vicarage with the village priest and his wife, and then we would do the service together the following morning in his church and lay Billy to rest in his quiet little country churchyard. Well, I'm not psychic. I'm as practical and matter-of-fact and everyday as a guy can be. And I need, shall we say, a medium. If I'm investigating a haunted house, I need a trusted psychic or medium to come with me and tell me what he or she can experience. Mm-hmm. But for the first and maybe almost only time in my life, I had a genuine, first-hand, personal psychic experience. Maybe because Bill and I had been such close friends. But I was sitting on the couch with Father Ian. We had our prayer books open. We were making a note of which of us was going to do which part of the service the following morning. And suddenly, I was aware that Billy was standing behind the couch, smiling all over his face, looking 30 years younger, no sign of any illness, radiantly, vibrantly happy and healthy, arms round our shoulders, and saying, it's really good of you two pals to do this for me after a long day's work. And he laughed. And then he said, Lionel, tell Ian, Lady Juliana of Norwich was absolutely right. Now that message was so strange and so disconnected with anything that I'd ever thought of in connection with Bill. But I thought, if this really is him in spirit, I've got to keep faith with him and tell Ian. And I said, Ian, this will sound crazy, I know, but Billy is asking me to tell you Lady Juliana of Norwich was absolutely right. Well, Ian moved away as if he'd had an electric shock. And he stared at me. in bewilderment and said, Lionel, you can't have known this. And then he said what the significance was. He said, I was with Billy in the intensive care ward as he took his last few breaths on earth. And the last thing I said to him was, Billy, hold on to this thought. There was a great saint in Norwich known as Lady Juliana. She lived in the 1400s. She had a vision of heaven. She was in sort of semi-trance, and the other nuns were gathered round her in case she fell. And when she recovered her senses, they all asked her, Juliana, are you okay? Well, what's happened? And she said, I have had a vision of heaven. And she was ecstatically happy. And then they asked her, of course, what was it like? And all she could say was, all shall be well, and all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. And that was her description of heaven. It was just beyond words, but everything's perfect. And then Ian looked at me and said, and you're telling me that Billy has come back to tell us Juliana of Norwich was right? I'm there, and it's just as she described it. It's too wonderful for words. And at that point, we decided we needed a drink. So we opened a bottle of wine. But it was the most amazing experience, Jeremiah. And as I said, when I'm talking to friends or families who've been bereaved, I like to share that story with them as part of my duty as a priest, my work as a priest, in trying to express my belief in a much better world to come, where everything that went wrong here will be put right for us.
Right. Now, I have a question from the chat room kind of along these lines, and they're asking, being a priest, what do you think about people who see most paranormal phenomena as being demonic?
Now that's a very, very important question, one I'm more than happy to deal with. There is, for some reason, in many parts of all the denominations, a number of people who really feel that that we shouldn't investigate the things that I investigate, that they do have demonic origins. Now, I don't think that for a moment. I do think that there may well be dark and mysterious forces out there, but whether they are the remains of unpleasant human beings, whether those who were nasty to their fellow human beings while they were alive and mortal and in the flesh go on being unpleasant after they've passed to the other side, or whether there are dark forces, dark entities. From the biblical accounts, Jesus certainly cast out evil spirits, so that's a pretty solid plank on which to base a belief that there are dark, negative forces, just as there are, I believe, guardian angels and very good forces that can assist us. So it's an area for speculation, what these other beings and entities might be, in addition, of course, to the departed souls of human beings. I don't think that people stop loving us just because they've left this earth, and I'm quite sure that those who've been our close friends or loving parents or grandparents and who've gone over ahead of us, I think they're still around and they're still interested in us, and they will help us from time to time when it's appropriate. But let's come right back to the core of this question. The way that I would phrase it is this, that God, who I believe is the creator and sustainer of the entire universe, has given us a sense of curiosity, has given us an interest in investigating, and when we look at all the progress that humanity has made culturally and scientifically over the last few centuries, that has been the result of fearless investigators who have been prepared to examine objectively, scientifically, whatever is out there. And my thought is that the God I believe in as being in total charge of the universe and having absolute power does not forbid us to go anywhere or to do anything. So whether I'm in a laboratory mixing chemicals for one of my students, or whether I'm analyzing the formation of a geological strata for one of my students who's doing geography or geology, whether I'm examining something straightforward and simple and physical, or whether I'm in a haunted house trying to find out what is causing the phenomena in that house, I am equally entitled to do it. Now, a lot of the biblical objections to looking into, shall we say, psychic investigation tends to go back to King Saul and the Witch of Endor. And it's a story which, shall we say, the Bible-based Christian groups tend to use as their precedent. Saul went along to see this witch, who was what we would have called a medium, and she called up, according to the Bible account, the spirit of Samuel the prophet, and he gave Saul some pretty bad news, saying that he was going to lose the next battle and be killed. And so the idea that you are not supposed to consult a medium, or you're not supposed to consult someone psychic who can communicate with the next world, goes right back to that one episode with Saul, the king of the Hebrews. At that time, he was the predecessor of King David when the Hebrew monarchy got started, so we're looking well over 3,000 years ago. Now, for myself, while I respect the views of those who feel that any so-called psychic phenomena are caused by dark powers, I disagree with them absolutely. I see the universe as something full of mystery, full of intriguing new facts that are waiting to be discovered, and whatever a poltergeist may be, or whatever is causing the footprints in the haunted castle, or whatever is writing spirit messages, or painting psychic pictures, or even playing psychic music, as one famous medium used to be able to do, I think we are fully entitled to examine that there is every chance that we are looking at the work of a departed human spirit who has, for some reason, decided to come back and communicate with us. So, for myself, I'll have a go at anything, I'll investigate anything, and I don't think I'm contravening God's laws if I go into a haunted house with a recorder and see whether I can pick up the noises the ghost is making.
Well, that question, by the way, came from Knock in the chat room, who wanted me to let you to thank you for answering the question and saying it's one of the best answers he has ever heard for that question.
Oh, I'm deeply honored. Thank you very much, Mark.
So, all right. Well, now, I one of the things that I really wanted to get into before we run out of time is some of the expeditions you have been on, and that is whether, I mean, you're talking about being in haunted houses or even looking for treasure. I know we kind of shifted a little bit there after the break, but that's no big deal there. So, what are some of these that you have been on, and how do you prepare for them to start with?
Well, one of the first things that we wanted to investigate with the big mystery was the mystery of Lionel Chateau, and I was at that time doing this course for the extramural board at the University of Cambridge on the psychology and sociology of unexplained phenomena. So this was back in 1975 when we lived in East Anglia, and I said I was working for the university, and there came on air a program, a little documentary by the three Wren investigators, Lincoln, Bagent, and Lee. That's Henry Lincoln, who did the documentary. And he called it The Priest, the Painter, and the Devil. And it was one of the most interesting documentaries that we'd ever seen. And so we took our children, who were then quite small, to stay with grandmother, and which they loved and which she loved, and Patricia and I then set off down for Rennes-le-Château. On the way down there, because we were always looking for extra mysteries, we stopped off at Vichy in central France, because just outside Vichy there was the legend, or the strange tale, of the Glosel alphabet. Now, there's a tiny hamlet just outside Vichy, and a family called Fradin, Émile Fradin, was the central man in this story. And way back in 1924, his grandfather, who was the farmer then on their small farm at Glosel, had the misfortune to have a cow involved in an accident. And this poor beastie had fallen into a hole about 8 or 9 feet deep. Wasn't apparently injured, but was very distressed and couldn't get out. So Grandad calls on teenage Emile and says, I need a strong, agile man to go down this hole with a piece of webbing to get underneath the cow. And then all the friends and neighbours had gathered, because they helped one another. You had a problem on your farm, your neighbours would come and help, and when they had a problem, you go and help. It was a lovely community. And so a dozen or so strong local farmers turned up, and young Emile went down, got the webbing under the cow, passed a piece up each side of this hole into which she had fallen, and strong, willing, caring hands lifted very, very gently, and the poor old cow came up and was, shocked but otherwise uninjured, and wandered off in search of buttercups or whatever they do. Anyway, Emile then said to his grandfather, may I stay down here, grandfather, before I start work, because there are all sorts of interesting things down here. It's not just an ordinary hole in the ground. And he said there were little niches and alcoves, and he began passing up Neolithic axes, arrowheads. Then he found some little statuettes that had been carved rather like the famous Venus of Willendorf, the very exaggerated female figure in most of which most apparently Stone Age communities had either as a representation of the earth goddess, but it was quite widely known for the society of those days. And among others, there were carved antlers, carved bones, but the most intriguing thing of all was some clay tablets. And those tablets were engraved with curious signs and symbols and what appeared to be an unknown alphabet. Now, a friend of the Fradin family, Vichy being a big medical center, was Dr. Mollet, and he was an amateur archaeologist, as well as being a doctor of medicine. And he came over when he heard what had been found there, looked at these amazing things. Then he sends to Paris for a leading academic archaeologist, Professor Capitan. Professor Capitan comes down and declares the thing to be wonderful. And then, and this is where all the problem arose, he said to Dr. Mollet, would you be kind enough to write this up and send it to me? Now, Mollet, who knew what the academic world was like, thought to himself, oh yes, Mollet does the work. The paper is published by Professor Capitan with a microscopic acknowledgement to Dr. Mollet. No thanks. He published it himself. Whereupon Professor Capitan went ballistic, changed his mind about the thing, said it was a stupid hoax, and that Mollet was an imbecile for being taken in by it. And of course he, Capitan, had previously said it was the most exciting discovery he'd ever seen. And that, in his opinion, Capitan's opinion, it was the Fradin family who had just made these clay tablets in order to attract visitors to the farm and charge them money. Now that controversy raged from 1924 all the way through the Second World War, with the archaeological establishment on one side and the Fradins and Dr. Mollet on the other. And we, as investigators of the mysterious wanted to visit the Glozell farm and find out. So we duly turned up at the Glozell farm, and the Fradins, who had, were the owners. And there, remember, it's now 1975, and the adventure had taken place with a teenage lad in 1924. Standing in the field near the gate was a sturdy farmer in his 60s with a pitchfork in one hand. He smiled and waved to us as we approached him, and we said, is this the Fradin farm place? Yes. And I said, well, I'm interested. I'm an investigator of mysteries, and I would love to see the material that was found in the hole. And is it still here on the farm? And do you still have the little museum? He put his pitchfork down, smiled broadly, banged himself on the chest, and said, "C'est moi, monsieur. Je suis Émile Fradin. Je découvre les objets mystérieux." And, wow, we had an incredible day. I couldn't believe it. I'd actually met the bloke who found it, who'd rescued the cow. And here he was in his 60s, and his adventure had happened 50 years before. And he showed us all the stuff he'd found. He took us out to see the hole and everything. It was amazing. We had a wonderful day with him. And I came away, Pat and I came away quite convinced that whatever else the mystery was of this unknown alphabet and these mysterious artifacts down there, that it was no hoax that the Fradins had come up with. There was something very real down there, a real mystery. And the controversy raged as to whether the objects had been made up as hoaxes and tricks or whether they were real, until along came thermoluminescence, discovered simultaneously in the University of Edinburgh and the University of Copenhagen, and basically it was a method as reliable as radiocarbon dating, except that you could use it for ceramics, which radiocarbon dating doesn't help us with. And all you have to do is to heat a portion of the ceramic and see when it glows. And the sooner it glows when heated, and you have a temperature scale up the side, then the older it is. So a fragment of Roman pottery would glow very quickly. Right. But if you broke a plate yesterday that had been made this year and put a fragment of that into a thermoluminescent detector, it would take a long time to glow. So the newer it is, the hotter you have to get it before it gives you the glow that you want, hence the name thermoluminescence. Anyhow, they subjected these Glozell finds to thermoluminescent analysis. And nothing was less than 500 years old, and some of the bits went back about 3,000 years. So the Fradins were totally justified, and whatever was down there was nothing that they had made, and we were delighted because in our books and lectures we'd backed them, and we were so pleased when the thermoluminescence came out and said, yeah, you were right to trust the Fradins. So what we're left with is an enormous mystery with this unknown alphabet. The question is who put it down there and why all these other objects down there, the Neolithic stuff, what was that doing down there? A theory that occurred to us was that as we stood there examining everything, that maybe 500 years or more ago there had been a medieval wise man or wise woman, a wizard or a witch, for want of a better word, who had collected these artifacts, which nobody understood, and had thought that the little flint arrows were fairy arrowheads, and that the little figurine of the Venus, like the Willendorf Venus, was some sort of goddess or fairy spirit. Right. And that, suppose you and I had been mercenary soldiers 500 years ago. We'd gone to see this wise man or woman who had these mysterious magical trinkets, and we said, look, we're going into battle next week. Have you got anything that'll protect us? Oh, yes, have one of these fairy arrowheads, and then no real arrow will touch you, my good soldier. Oh, that'll be 2 gold pieces, please. And then imagine you're in love with a beautiful girl, and you want your courtship to succeed, and you say to the wise man, wise woman, do you have any magic spell that will enable me to marry her? Oh, yes, I will carve one for you on this clay tablet. Keep this in your wallet, and then when you next go out with her, she will accept your proposal. And so there's all sorts of little magical gadgets. Now, we imagine that such a wise man or wise woman, witch or wizard, selling his or her trinkets to the locals would become the center of interest for the Inquisition. And so they were all stored in this underground chamber, and before going out on his or her rounds, the wise man would cover the top of the chamber with leaves and branches, and then come back at the end of the day's travels. And then suppose that one day the Inquisition does catch him. He never returns. And over the years, nature takes its course. The big warehouse of magical kit is still down there. And then in 1924, this poor cow walks across it and falls in. And so I think it may have been a storeroom for a medieval witch, wizard, or wise man who was trying to keep it hidden from the Inquisition. Only a theory, but something's got to account for why all that gear was down in that hole.
Yeah, and too, I mean, you have, from my understanding, you've got a range of age on it, you know, I mean...
Yes, you have.
Right, I mean, to me, if you were to find something, you'd figure most would be relatively the same age, from the same era, but from what it sounds like, you have a big span there.
Yeah, I think it was somebody's collection of magical objects, you know, from a period when nobody had any real understanding about ancient history. And when they found a flint arrowhead, they didn't think of Stone Age people making it. They said to themselves, hey, these are fairy arrows made from stone, magic, you know, flint. And so it went. But that was just one. Then, of course, we got down to Rennes-le-Château and investigated there at first hand with the mystery of Béranger Saunière, the priest who in 1885, suddenly from being an impoverished parish priest, became the richest man in the south of France. And all the theories that go with that. One, that the Priory of Zion, a mysterious secret society, which may or may not exist, though I'm inclined to think that they do, had used him as a figurehead and had rewarded him accordingly. The secret of the members of the Priory was allegedly that Jesus had married Mary Magdalene, alias Mary of Bethany, and that she and their children had escaped to the south of France at the time of the crucifixion. Now, there are two rival theories there, which we, in the course of our analysis, have tried to bring together. There are those who put forward the Mary Magdalene theory as being something that, as Christ's wife, as being something that totally contradicts and contravenes the gospel teaching about Jesus. And there are those who stand resolutely on the gospel teaching and say, no, there was no way he could have been married to Mary Magdalene because he had this important mission to fulfill. Now, our bringing together of those two apparently contradictory hypotheses would be to say that it doesn't, in my book, as a theologian and a priest, it does not preclude a happy marriage. If Jesus, as the Son of God, is also perfect man as well as perfect God, then perfect humanity finds a loving partner. And as I speaking from personal experience, I can't think of anything that would have fulfilled my life more than being married all these years to a woman I adore. And to fulfill his true humanity, if Jesus experiences the human emotion of falling in love and being married and being a loving husband and father, then if his first concern when he sees his political and religious enemies closing in on him and he sees death and as an inevitability if he's to fulfill his mission, his first concern would be to send Mary and the children to a place of safety.
Right.
And then, I then see no reason why the rest of the wonderful gospel story should not be true, that the resurrection really takes place, and that the marriage to Mary in no way contradicts Christ's divinity. It was just the finest part of his humanity. So I can bring the two theories together and say, yes, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't have been married to Mary, but that doesn't prevent him from being the unique Son of God and being resurrected. So that's the Fanthorpe compromise, the Fanthorpe hypothesis.
Well, I like that hypothesis. It does make some sense, and do correct me. I mean, I'm not a biblical scholar, but was it not Mary that upon the resurrection that he first went to?
Yes. In the account of the resurrection, there in the garden is Mary, and again, she instinctively wants to take him in her arms. She's overwhelmed with the happiness of the man she adores, and whom she had come to anoint with spices. And he's alive. And he says, "Touch me not, for I have not yet ascended to my Father." It's as though when she first saw him, the resurrection process, this miraculous process, was in some way not yet complete, and that he needed to, shall we say, humanize, to sort of solidify this resurrected body before he could embrace the woman he loved. But by appearing to her first, it's his way of saying, you're a very, very special person,
right,
and I want to see you. And she instinctively opens her arms to embrace him. And then there's that little word of caution, "Not yet, Mary. Very soon, but not yet."
Yeah.
I think that, your comment on the seeing him in the garden like that was a very important one, and it goes along with the general thinking about it, with what we were just discussing.
Yeah, and if that was I was in that situation, I would say the first person who I would want to see would be my wife.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And it's a thing that lovers will understand and appreciate. That the woman you love is more important to you than your own life. She's central to you. And I've got to say, just going over the tangent, on one occasion when Patricia and I were investigating Oak Island, we were going out in Nova Scotia. We were going over the waters of Mahone Bay, which were pretty rough and choppy, over to investigate a place called Frog Island, which was also associated with the Money Pit mystery. And the sea was ghastly, and the guy whose boat we chartered had it out on its sea trials, and he was the only one available, and he wasn't sure it was working okay, and it suddenly stopped working. He got some salt water into his diesel feed, so we're in this little cockle shell of a boat in the middle of sort of 4, 5, 6 foot waves, and the thing's tossing left and right. While it had an engine going, it was fine. Without an engine, it was like sitting in a bathtub in the middle of a stormy sea. And my Patricia doesn't swim, and I'm, among my other little bits and pieces, I'm a pretty powerful swimmer. And it looked as if the thing was going over, and I suddenly realised that when you say to a person you love in safety in your armchair, I'd do anything for you, honey, your life's more important than mine. I said to her, look, if we can't both get out of this, I'm not going anywhere. If this thing goes over, you grab me and you hang on tight, and I'll get us out. And it didn't go over. We were rescued, and we're here to tell the tale. But it was just that one moment when you and I were talking about how important a loving wife is to a loving man. You say, okay, honey, if I can't get you out, I'm not getting out. This is, we'll get out together, or I'll die trying.
Yes, very, very much so. I have to say, Lionel, it sounds like you almost are living a Indiana Jones type of life.
Well, we do. We do to some extent. And then there was the wonderful occasion when the BBC sent us over to They examine the coffins in the Chase Elliott vault in Barbados, and there we stood in this allegedly haunted vault. What had happened in 1809, every time a member of the Chase Elliott family died and was laid to rest in this vault, and it's still there, anybody can go to Christchurch near St. Austins in Barbados and see the thing. It happened 5, 6, 7 times. And these big coffins, because of the climate, these big coffins were lead cased and very heavy. And finally, after it had gone on recurring, the governor of Barbados, who was then Lord Combermere, said to the local priest, Father Alderson, I want to seal this place up next time we bury somebody. And so at the next ceremony, to lay a member of the Chase Elliott family to rest in the vault, the floor was sanded, stonemasons were brought in to check the coral stone blocks of which the vault was constructed. It was 90% of it was below ground, but there was a little bit on the top, and you went down this flight of steps to the actual door, but you could see the top of the vault from the cemetery ground level. And the big stone slab, very heavy, Devonshire marble, was cemented into place, and Combermere and his friends and colleagues, who were the sort of plantocracy of Barbados in those days, made marks in the wet cement so that some of them pressed their signet rings into it so that that could not be broken without it being known. And 3 months passed, and nobody died. Now, Combermere, before becoming governor of Barbados, had worked for the Duke of Wellington as a cavalry commander, and he had the scars to prove it. Very, very brave man, but not a patient man. So he goes to see Father Alderson again and says, I can't wait for one of these Chase Elliots to die. I want to see what's happened in there. And Alderson says, yes, Governor, certainly, Governor. And they called some workmen in, who lifted the big stone slab, and there's a breathless pause because one of the lead coffins is making its way up the stairs. It was 3/4 of the way up the staircase towards the big stone slab. Whereupon Governor Combermere said to the priest, right, I want them all out there. I want them buried in separate graves around your churchyard. And he said, this place stays open and empty on my orders. Well, now, although it's a couple of 100 years since Lord Combermere gave those orders, the vault was still wide open. And when we went to make the BBC documentary down there, as I said, Patricia and I were down there. She, with her wonderful common sense and complete absence of fear, looked around the thing and said, you know, dear, this would make a very nice chicken house. I just loved that. I thought it was good. And we had a Barbadian taxi driver who was a lovely chap, and because we were doing the BBC documentary and because it was good for tourism, the Barbados Tourist Board had supplied us with the guy who had won Driver of the Year for being particularly helpful and nice to tourists. And he was a lovely chap, and a big, strong Barbadian with, it didn't look as if he'd have been scared of anything. And I was down and I thought, if I could get another voice on this, as well as Patricia and myself, that would really enrich the documentary. So I called up, would you come down and tell me about the vault? What do you think of it? And he looked down. He said, I'm not going down there, not after what my grandmother told me. And then, brief pause, and you could see him looking at me, and he's thinking, hey, if this BBC guy is willing to go down there, I'm as tough as he is, I'll go down with him. And he said, as long as you're there, I'll come. And I felt very proud to think that so this very big, tough Barbadian was prepared to come down the haunted vault as long as I was there. And he came down and told me all the strange things that had happened while he was down there. Another amazing place that we examined in a lot of depth and detail was Croglin Grange up in Cumbria in Britain. just a little bit north of the famous Lake District, which is a big tourist attraction. And the story was written, and again, those of our listeners who've got access to university libraries would be able to look this up in a rather rare book, which was called simply The Story of My Life, written by Augustus Hare. Now, Augustus Hare wrote this particular episode about the Croglin Grange vampire when a member of the Hare family married a member of the Fisher family, who had once been the owners of Croglin Grange up in the north. And all that I can think of to account for Augustus Hare's error was that when he met Captain Fisher at the wedding reception, there had been rather a lot of champagne about, so that Augustus and Captain Fisher were not terribly clear about the details of the account. And I think when Augustus woke up the following morning with a bit of a hangover, he filled in the bits inaccurately, or his misunderstanding was there. Anyhow, the story itself, and it's one of those pointers to all open-minded investigators that like to be objective and factual. It tells us where the danger may come. The basic story was this. The Fishers had business interests in London. They couldn't sell Croglin Grange because it was so far north and so isolated that they let it out instead on a 7-year lease. And it went to a family called Cranswell, 2 brothers and a sister, Amelia. Now, they hadn't been there very long. It was a single-story building, and the bedrooms were therefore on the ground floor. Amelia, looking out through her bedroom window, sees what was described in the account as a scarecrow-like figure with red eyes coming towards her. It started to undo the lead lights on the old-fashioned bedroom window. Amelia screams blue murder, tries to get out of the room, not taking her eyes off whatever's coming through the window, hands behind her back as she tries to unlock the door, fails to unlock it, but drops the key on the floor, so that her brothers, who are trying to get to her rescue, cannot get through this very stout locked door. By the time they've broken it down to rescue their sister, she has been attacked by whatever came through the window and badly bitten on the face and throat. She recovers, although she's very ill for a time, and then decides they're not going to waste this 7-year lease they've taken out. When she's better, they will go back to the Grange, and the boys take her to Switzerland, convalescing. While they're there, and she's got the mind of a good military strategist, I admire this lady, first for her courage and then for her thinking ability. She says to the boys, buy a pair of pistols while we're here, and when we go back, we'll leave all the doors open. I want one of you opposite my room and the other one near the door, so that if anything comes again, one of you can race out with one gun and shoot him on the lawn, and the other one is there to defend me. The boys think this is great. So they duly buy these pistols, and the key to the story here is that those pistols had ammunition with them, and it was Swiss lead, and it was of an unusual greenish color. It was distinctive.
Right.
And within just a short while, after they're back home in the Grange, the thing comes again, and Amelia's plan works perfectly. One of the boys is beside her, gun in hand and ready. The other one is out of the front door, like a greyhound, catches up with this scarecrow-like figure, and shoots it at point-blank range in the leg. It screams and writhes and gets away from him, and he watches it disappear into a church, which is very close by, and he sees it go into a vault and close the door. Wow, he thinks, I don't know what this is, and my gun is empty. I'm not going in there after it. He waits in the hope that somebody will come. Nobody does. He goes back and rouses a group of the local guys, the blacksmith and 2 or 3 hostlers and 1 or 2 other fellas who are quite fearless and ready to go after the stuff, after whatever it is. And then this group, led by the Cranswell brothers, go into the vault. When they get into the vault, they find one coffin up on a dais, no lid. In it is a semi-mummified figure that's obviously been long dead, but fresh red blood on the hands and on the mouth. And this time the boys are now convinced this is a vampire. So with whatever vampire folklore they know, they take it to the crossroads, they behead it, they cut the limbs off, they hammer a stake into it, and then they burn the bits. Well, in the process of dismembering this mummified corpse, they find a Swiss pistol ball stuck in one of the legs. Wow. So now Patricia and I are investigating this firsthand. We go to Croglin Grange and we talk to the farmer who is now using it as a farmhouse. And lo and behold, it has 2 stories, not 1. Then we go to investigate Croglin Village Church, which turns out to be 2 miles away, whereas in the story it was supposed to be close. Then Augustus Hare and Captain Fisher, when they were exchanging this information at the wedding, Augustus had got the idea that this had happened in his time, round about 1880, 1870, because he thought it was a recent story. And of course it then occurs to us, if I was about to take on some very unpleasant entity like the thing that had attacked Amelia, I would not take a single-shot pistol. I would take a Smith & Wesson 6-chambered revolver or a Colt, so that I got more than 1 shot at him. I wouldn't use a single-shot gun. So the whole thing seemed weird. Then we had a long discussion with a wonderfully helpful lady who lived in the farmhouse, Mrs. Johnson, and she said, "Come over here." And within 50 yards of the house of Croglin Grange, there were indications that something was buried. There were the foundations of something. And she said, before Oliver Cromwell knocked it down, damaged it, this was a small private church which served the Grange and its servants and the near neighbours. She said Cromwell's men destroyed it, and other villagers came and stole the stonework and used it in their buildings. But she said there was a church here prior to Oliver Cromwell in the 17th century. Then she said, "Come and look at this." And she showed us some corbels in the roof, and she said, "An architect friend of mine told me that this old house, which is centuries old, once had only a single story. It was all on the ground floor. But at some time in the early 18th century, they built a second story, whereas a lot of country house owners would tend to build a new wing. This guy had gone upwards and put bedrooms on the top. Right. So now everything is coming together. There was a church near Croglin Grange into which the whatever he was could have run, and a vault there. There had once been only a single story, but it had been added to. All you had to do was to get past the mistake that Augustus Hare had made when he listened to Captain Fisher, and say it didn't just happen in the 1870s, it happened in the 1670s, which was why the boys had single-shot pistols.
Right.
Everything came together. The architecture was explained, the church with the vault was explained, and the single-shot pistols were explained. But does this mean it was a real vampire? I was giving this as part of a lecture, and I had a very bright young doctor, GP, in the audience. And when we came to question time, he said, Lionel, I've got a theory. What if the attacker, he said, let's take the story as factual, and Amelia is attacked by somebody who is perfectly human and physical, but is mentally ill. He attacks the girl, and then makes his escape on the first visit. When he comes back on the second visit, he runs into two powerful, angry men with guns, one of whom shoots him in the leg. He races to the vault in that church next to Crogwyn Grange, which had been his headquarters, like the man in the New Testament who said, "My name is Legion," and he lived among the tombs. Right. So, before Jesus healed him. And so now we've got a wounded, mentally ill, psychopathic attacker who has gone for his headquarters knowing that there is a man with a gun not far behind him. Now, he listens to see if young Cranswell is coming in to finish him, but nothing happens because young Cranswell doesn't want to go in there on his own with an empty gun.
Right.
And so the attacker, now bleeding profusely from the wound in his leg, goes to the ancient corpse which had been there 100 years and more and is as innocent of the attack on Amelia as you and me. And the attacker smears blood from his leg onto the mouth and hands of the corpse. Then, in the course of this, he manages to work the lead ball out of his leg muscle and thrusts it into the leg of the corpse. Then goes to the door, peeps out, and sees that the young man with a gun has gone. And I'm going to sneeze. Bear with me 1 second. Sorry. It's the excitement. It's all these damp vaults. Anyway, so there had been several other attacks in the village on animals as well as people. But after the guys took the old blood-stained corpse to the crossroads and pulled it to bits, there were no further attacks. And so everybody says, "Oh, it was a real vampire. We've destroyed it. Hooray!" Right. And the doctor said what had really happened was that the mentally ill patient who had pulled the pistol ball from the wound in his leg had also been handling the corpse and had given himself gangrene. And he said 3 or 4 weeks later, the poor guy dies in a ditch in another parish a few miles away. Right. Nobody knows who he is. He's given a pauper's funeral, and the Crogwyn Grange vampire is no more. So there was really the tale of an investigation that seemed to destroy the story, but when you don't give up and investigate again and go deeper with the help of the knowledgeable people on site, like Mrs. Johnson, who helped us, then you find that maybe there was something here after all. And I can still imagine Augustus Hare and Captain Fisher at that wedding reception having another glass of champagne and Augustus Hare writing all this down. And when it was fully investigated, what the Fisher family said was, what Captain Fisher from the 1870s had said was, "This is a story my grandmother told me, and it wasn't new in her time." So we're back to the 1670s instead of the 1870s.
That was a very good story. That was great. Well, and I hate to say, Lionel, we're out of time as well.
Oh, well, it's been I've enjoyed it enormously, and I do hope that some of our listeners have too. It's been wonderful to be with you, Jeremiah.
Well, they definitely have seemed to enjoy it. And before you leave, please give your website one more time, where as well they can find many of the books that you have written.
Yeah, sure. The website is World Wide Web, the 3 W's, then my name, Lionel Fanthorpe, with a hyphen in the middle. So it's World Wide Web, Lionel-Fanthorpe.com. And as I said, I shall be delighted to hear from any of our listeners who contact me via the website, because my address is there and everything is on there for contacting me, my email and everything they need.
Wonderful. And Lionel, again, it was just an honor having you on the show and a pleasure, and I appreciate you staying up so late because you're in the UK over there. You are overseas, so it is very early in the morning for you, and I appreciate that.
It's a pleasure. Okay, now.
All right, Lionel, you have a good night as well.
We'll sure do.
All right. Well, everybody, that was Lionel Fanthorpe. Definitely a great show. So make sure to check out his website and the many books he has on the subjects talked about tonight. There is quite a bit. So I definitely want to thank Lionel for joining us tonight, and as well as everybody who joined us in the chat room. We always appreciate that. And, of course, if you're an archive listener, we always appreciate you as well. Now, this Thursday, we will be talking to H. Michael Sweeney, the professional paranoid. Michael is the author, publisher, and consultant who specializes in crimes of the intelligence community and personal privacy and security. So it should be kind of interesting. So make sure to join us. That is Thursday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. As always. So again, thanks to Lionel, thanks to everybody who joined us in the chat room. What a wonderful time we had. We really appreciate it. So good night, everyone. This has been Shadows in the Dark, where the darkness is illuminated.
Shadows in the Dark.